I now call the committee of the whole meeting to order for Monday, September 23rd, 2024. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting of Monday, September 23, 2024? Mover, Councillor Popoff, Councillor Ray. Those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Moving to new business. One item of new business this afternoon is from the Engineering Development Services Department and Context Group regarding a council development and incentive session. Can I please have the Engineering Development Services Department walk us through the presentation?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have this presentation that we're really excited to bring to Council today. This is an initiative that sort of follows along with a lot of the great proactive planning and land development work that we've been doing, both from a policy perspective, and then this is going to talk a little bit about some of the work that goes into the development process, not just from the city's perspective, but also behind the scenes from the private sector's perspective, to really just help provide a little bit more of that understanding, and then preview some of the options that the city has going forward. So I'll hand it over to our consultant, Mark Koch here, who's going to lead the presentation.
Is that on? Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for the intro, Mike. Appreciate it. I'm Mark Koch with Context Group. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I love working with local councils and doing community work. So thank you for your service, truly. It's fantastic to be in Cranbrook. What a lovely community, and started a bit of a cloudy day, but it's just shaping up just to be a beautiful fall day. So it's absolutely lovely to be here. So today, like Mike mentioned, we're here to talk about development incentives. And I think this stuff is kind of cool. So hopefully my passion kind of rubs off, your worship and council. But I do think it is fun. It's important for a community to try to position their policies, their incentives, their financial tools in trying to continue building out the community. So today, just to start with a high-level purpose, the project objectives, it's a small project. It is firstly to look at education and awareness of development incentive options, to facilitate citywide economic development, diversification, and investment attraction, and to lastly incentivize local developers and attract out-of-town or out-of-market developers to come and work in beautiful Cranbrook. So that's the high-level project purpose. Now, zooming down a little to focus on two of the key questions that we're looking to ask pragmatically in this conversation. It is firstly, how to incentivize local developers to build more units across the city, and to ask how to attract developers from outside the market to invest in Cranbrook. And again, cities have levers. They're not infinite levers. That's going to be my message. There's certainly high-level things that are at play in terms of the global economy that Cranbrook or any other community for that matter cannot control. But it is important for council to know the tools that are available, because there'll be some that work better for the local context and some that don't work well in this marketplace. So that's the general purpose of this discussion. I also think in this very interesting market that we're in from a real estate land development perspective, interest rates are high, coming down. It seems like we're in this strange limbo period right now. So my advice always to every council is to try to position yourself to be ready for when the market revs and starts up again, because we're anticipating it to come. Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but I think from policy tool incentive perspective, now's the time to really try to get things in order and build the toolkit as you want it to be. So just a high-level overview of today's presentation. Firstly, project and purpose, which we've covered. Some background, which I think it's always important, because we're not starting from zero. There's a ton of fantastic work that's happened in Cranbrook and continues to happen. Staff are doing an amazing job and honestly hitting well above their weight class, I suppose, to use a boxing analogy. I don't know where to go with that. I'm not into boxing, but there's some fantastic stuff that's happened and a lot of great policy work. So I think it's always important to acknowledge that and see where we're starting from. Of course, council gets the great privilege to change policies if they wish, and adjust and adopt new tools and strategies as they want. We're going to discuss Development 101 really quickly, just a couple slides. There's so much to development finance, but it's important for us to just reflect for a moment on the economics of land development, because it is intricate. And like I say, we're in an interesting space right now. The role of infrastructure, we cannot understate how important infrastructure is in building a community. We know about the infrastructure crisis that Cranbrook and every other community, for that matter, that we work in is facing. It is real. Asset aging out is very real and tangible. So we need to be very alive to the important role that infrastructure plays in building a fantastic community. When you talk about a vibrant community that is attracting people, it's the IT community where everyone wants to be. It's the place that definitely has built really important infrastructure from a cool placemaking perspective, but also from a nuts and bolts, maybe not as sexy perspective, repairing pipes underground that maybe don't look any different, but are essential that they function and don't blow up. We're looking at some of the available tools and just a very quick scan of some of the other best practices from other communities. And then lastly, to look at next steps, where we're going from here. Right? Please feel free to ask any questions as I'm going. I will try to stay on time. I've got my clock here. I know that that's always important. So, Your Worship, doing this high-level policy scan, I think one need not start any different place other than the strategic plan. Recently adopted, fantastic plan. Cranbrook truly has their house in order, and this is a great document. Now, the most relevant sort of section or direction from within the strategic plan is this one: to create a supportive environment for growth in housing and economic development. I think a fantastic objective to flag within the strategic plan. We're not going to dive too deep into all these policies and different documents that I'm going to talk about, but just to lay the groundwork that this direction, this intent for incentivizing development in Cranbrook, we're talking about housing, we're talking about placemaking, we're not starting from zero. The official community plan, again, another fantastic document, has policy statements in there reading, our local economy is strong, stable, and diverse to create quality employment opportunities supported by a range of housing for our residents. We needn't talk about the housing, well, we should talk about the housing crisis, but I think it's not news. We all know about the challenge in terms of housing affordability. My morning I spent just popping into a few stores and chatting with people, and of course, affording a good home in Cranbrook and every other community is not always an easy proposition for everyone. The OCP goes on to look at establishing a strong, vibrant downtown with commercial, professional, financial services. It speaks a little bit about low or no cost parking, which is interesting. Got another slide on parking in just a moment. Well-lit and landscaped pedestrian corridors, so that's sort of that placemaking piece, functional and well-designed streetscapes, and of course, increasing mixed-use development. The Downtown Revitalization Master Plan is another great document. Of course, Council has worked closely with this document. It's fairly new. It has a number of key directions here to look at creating vibrancy, of course, in the downtown, to bring people downtown, promote downtown redevelopment. So this is the piece about housing, having people live in your core. It really is it's the critical component in building a vibrant community and to enhance the identity of downtown, so that sense of place. I was in Santa Barbara a year ago, and there's a really cool community called the Funk Zone, which I just think is kind of a cool name, and fantastic barbecue and beers and all sorts of cool stuff. But having that sense of identity, and however Cranbrook chooses to do that to attract people downtown, will be an important part of this. So housing strategy, which was done in July, so again, another recent document, looks at the strategic direction number 2 to create local government support to create affordable housing. So what is the local government's role in all of this? And I think these are important questions. The housing strategy goes on to mention updating policies, bylaws, regulations to support affordable housing, establish incentives to encourage types of housing needed to address identified needs and gaps. So we certainly see the distinction. And we've got a few numbers. This isn't an exhaustive study in terms of data, but we did a bit of a dive to talk about what's happening in terms of housing numbers that are currently occurring. And of course, the market housing reality seems to be happening. The non-market spectrum on the housing continuum is always, in every community, a little bit more complex to try to deliver. We know that the BC Housing and other agencies, there's lots of partners to work with, but we certainly see the market side on the higher end homes. It's happening, and we are very interested in trying to understand that continuum a little bit more. Now, another piece that, again, to give the team a compliment is the Cranbrook Development Guide, which may not sound like a particularly sexy document, but it's about understanding the process. And to me, I think this stuff is really cool, and I think it's important because I, in a lot of my work, also work with private development, and we go to communities, and sometimes for the first time when you're knocking on the door, you don't know exactly how the processes work. I mean, zoning has certain statutory processes, but it's not always the same. And for the team to have detailed out what the development approvals process looks like through this guide is a fantastic tool. People appreciate this. So I did want to just flag that this is a part of the conversation when Cranbrook's talking about what does bringing development into the community look like. It's about, well, how are these business folks welcomed as you enter the community? How are they assisted in navigating the process? Now, the housing needs assessment, it did some fantastic work. I think this one is a few years old. I recall it from 2021. It flagged 690 homes as being needed over the next 10 years. So simple math, 69 homes a year. Again, not the deepest dive on the document. I'm sure staff can certainly fill in a lot of blanks if there's additional questions, but that's the gap that we saw, maybe a few years ago. I certainly don't anticipate that gap going down. It's probably heading upwards. But if we're aiming for about 69 homes a year, you'll actually see in a few slides, we're in excess of 69 homes. It's the type of homes that are occurring. It's not the non-market homes that we're seeing happen. So it's quite clear that there's a lot of activity happening in Cranbrook, and we're going to talk in just a moment about how Cranbrook's development activity and housing activity compares to others in the province and also within the local region. So the housing needs assessment, just for additional policy background here, had three kind of key tenets that were quite relevant to the conversation today. Approaches to addressing identified needs, market rental housing, non-market rental housing. And you look at some of these tools, these bullets below, these are tools in the toolkit, right? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about development incentives, development incentive tools. And council at some point will be working through what tools they want to put in the toolkit, or maybe refine some existing tools that exist, or add new tools into the toolkit to achieve the intended objectives. You'll see things like parking reductions, downtown or revitalization tax exemptions, fee waivers, pre-zoning under the multi-housing category, which is interesting too. At this point in time, of course, with all the provincial changes that's been happening, a lot of our land has automatically been pre-zoned through Bill 44, 46, 47. I forget all the numbers, but all the bills that have been happening, and everyone's been scrambling to get done. So these are a lot of the tools. Staff delegation, development variance permits have until a couple of years ago not been able to be delegated. Now these are tools that can be done to make things a little bit more efficient, get people in and out of the system a little quicker. Now the tourism master plan, also obviously a little bit more specific to the tourism sector, but when you talk about development, attracting tourism and attracting investment, it's quite entwined, and actually more so than I ever thought. You're talking to some substantial investors. I'm from Kelowna. You talk about people that are developing some of the biggest projects in the Okanagan, just because that's my experience, is they used to vacation there. They grew up coming here. And of course, Cranbrook has the same long legacy with people coming to enjoy this beautiful neck of the woods. And that's oftentimes how people discover your community or continue wanting to have that investment relationship with your community. So, a lot of great work's happening on the tourism front. The tourism master plan speaks to creating or incentivizing programs to support investment, revitalization and renovation of tourism-based properties and businesses, including hotels and downtown buildings. It also looks to incentivize improvement of business facades, such as those at the end of Baker Street, to reconnect and celebrate downtown heritage, which I think Baker Street is really cool. And I had a lovely walk around this morning. So I think the work that's happened already is noticed, and these things continue. The work is never done, right? So I commend council and staff for the fantastic work that's happened today. Now, a bit of the numbers, and again, there's a great quote about stats and lies, damn lies, and stats, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but I do think it's interesting to position where Cranbrook sits on a number of fronts, because these are indices, I suppose, to try to understand about the growth and development that's happening in Cranbrook. And you'll see on the screen quite simple. We went to BC Stats and we looked at the 3 larger communities and the 3 smaller communities. So this isn't rocket science. It's very basic, but you'll see Cranbrook's in the middle, of course, because that was the whole kind of design of this, 22,053 people. And the brackets are the 2023 growth percentage from BC Stats. So you'll see the 3 larger ones are, Squamish, White Rock, Fort St. John. Squamish sort of in a metro area, though a little bit outside of Metro Vancouver, but White Rock, of course, within Metro Vancouver. Fort St. John, sort of a standalone, independent, standalone community. Of course, Cranbrook, regional hub. Colwood, part of the Metro Victoria area. Pitt Meadows, I'd say, part of the Metro Vancouver, and Salmon Arm, sort of that independent, standalone regional center, I suppose. So those are the communities we're going to discuss in comparison with on a few bases. And we're also going to look at the others within the region, because I think, how we're doing within our specific region. And that's why we looked at our regional comps. So as of 2023, Cranbrook, of course, is the largest regional hub within the region. Moving down Kimberley, Fernie, Sparwood, you can see the populations and also the growth percentages. So it's quite interesting. So I'm just going to follow through with a few quick pieces of data here, looking at how Cranbrook compares to others, the 3 larger, 3 smaller throughout BC and also throughout the region. Now, looking at building permit dollars, this is an interesting metric where, again, these are the 3 larger, 3 smaller. Oddly enough, Cranbrook sits right in the middle. So, Colwood, obviously Victoria, Squamish, edge of Vancouver. And this number here is the total over the last 5 years, not 2024, of course, it's an incomplete year, averaged out, so divided by 5. And this is where it landed. And we did that just to try to smooth out a few of the blips, because, if you're in a community and there's a big hospital that gets built or big institutional build or whatever it may be, that can certainly spike the data. So just to try to smooth it out, fairly comparable data here. Cranbrook sits in the middle at 57 million average per year over the last 5 years. So an interesting figure. Now, in terms of regional building permit comps, you can see Cranbrook at the top at 57, it's the same figure as the last slide, and then Fernie at 42 million, Kimberley 32, and so on. So again, interesting figures just to look how are we doing, because things are definitely happening within Cranbrook. This is not an insignificant number, seeing that we compare quite reasonably to others throughout the province, and of course, at the top within our region. Now, housing starts is another interesting one, because this is what it's about. This is about doors opening and people with keys to move into their homes. So this is the same methodology over the last 5 years, averaged out, and you'll see Colwood 374 per year, averaged out over the last 5 years. Cranbrook 126. So remember that 69 figure from the housing needs assessment? We're hitting fair bit above that. So it's quite interesting, but it's neat to see. I do suspect we didn't dive into this, but this is more market housing rather than the biggest gaps in the housing need assessment, which are more on the non-market side. But Pitt Meadows 52, Fort St. John 51, at 126 homes starts per year. It's not an insignificant number. Now the regional starts compare. Again, Cranbrook at the top, Kimberley 83, Fernie 62, and you can see the figures there. Just to sort of place in position where we're at in terms of what's happening in the community. Now, Development 101, this is just very, very high level to speak about how development economics works, right? Of course, there's the revenue side, there's the cost side. Revenue, what do you sell? Usually on a per square foot basis. On the cost side, there's a lot of inputs. It's a complex business. Land development is of course high risk, and that's hopefully there's high rewards, although that depends on the market realities. But some of the costs are land. That's a substantial cost, and we haven't seen land costs go down much. Interestingly, where most markets are fairly stagnant, or there's not that much movement, but we haven't really seen the land values go down, or expectation of land values, where you have large landholders that are sitting on large development sites. They haven't necessarily been expecting or dropping their prices. You have to deal with soft costs, so those are your engineers, your architects. You think of step code. There's all sorts of new and interesting changes to design processes Construction hard costs, you think of the commodity challenges that we've been facing through the hyperinflation that we've all been experiencing, although I think we're close to being near that 2% target right now, but it's been a very turbulent time within the land development world. Municipal fees and approvals, to be honest, it's not the largest sector. So when I talk about the levers that local governments have, they do work, and I don't want to communicate that they're worthless, don't bother, but they are a small segment of the pie, and you'll see a visual in just a moment, that land development has to face. Marketing, it's substantial to market a condominium building. I mean, not always as much with a low-rise single-family project, but we're in the millions of dollars. Like it's not an insignificant amount. And of course, financing costs have been absolutely exorbitant. And the banks, you go to the banks, they don't tend to want to lend you unless your project is aiming for at least a 15% return. Oftentimes you try to aim for a little higher to build in a bit of a buffer. And it's not out of greed, it's just because the banks will not lend you if your project is not anticipating this kind of return. So there's all sorts of complex stuff, more so than I honestly am an expert at, but cash flow models, return on equity, all sorts of stuff. All this to say it's a complex business with lots of different inputs, and the cities get to interface with a few very important pieces in the industry. Now, I mentioned finding and acquiring land, redefining the development concept. There's lots of design changes. Approvals, of course, is a big one. Approvals for a few in the lower rise up to the fourplexes through the various bills, as you know, have sort of been automated now. But for a larger project, and if Cranbrook has intention for, say, more multifamily within the downtown core, the approval process, it's complex. And of course, there's a lot of architecture and various design. I've spoken about financing, marketing, construction readiness, occupancy, and whatnot. So all that to say, lots of stuff that goes into the delivery of new homes. And here's an interesting clip that we picked up from Resi Club. So this is just a single family pie chart, and it is admittedly a US piece. So, it's not particularly local, but all this to say, if you look at this slide, that orange segment, I suppose, is really where the cities get to play. You look at all the other costs, framing, exterior finishes, plumbing, electrical, those are all hard costs. The city's kind of orangey red color, building permit fees, impact fees, sewer and water fees, inspections, that's the segment we're talking about. This is single family, but I think it absolutely holds true for multifamily too. So important tools, cities need to try to position their policy offering, their tools, their incentive offering well and customize it to their intentions. But I don't believe that a well-positioned incentive toolkit is always going to move the dial. It might nudge a project that is close to viability into just across the line, and now it's viable, but I don't think you're going to make a dramatically unviable project viable. But it is important to try to work with those folks that are looking to invest in your community so that you can maybe nudge them across the line. Now, some other factors, the market ups and downs, materials, labor, interest rates, inflation, code changes, an interesting one too. We've got these multi-crises going on in our society. Of course, climate crisis, we've got housing crisis. It sometimes feels tough to try to reconcile, code improvements versus housing provision. Can we do it together? That's a long conversation. I don't profess to have all the answers, but I did want to flag that it's oftentimes, it feels like they're very difficult crises to reconcile. Now, in terms of infrastructure, like I said previously, I went around Cranbrook this morning, looked at the bike lanes, and that's the stuff you can see. You think of the pipes underground, the bridges, the roads, the aging asphalt. I mean, these analyses are so important to incentivizing developers to come to your community, because if you don't have a great community that is appealing and it's the kind of place that people want to be in, then I don't think you're going to do very well in trying to incentivize or attract developers to come and work within your community. So, some of the infrastructure stuff can be sexy, for lack of a word, lack of a better term, is, parks, I think is, of course, it's glitzy. It's important. People enjoy it. I live near a new park that's opened up in my community, and it's really cool. I went to the opening, it's on the lake, it's just stunning, right? You see it being used on an active basis, but it can also just be that pipe under the ground it's ancient, and we prevented a crisis by proactively getting out there and managing our assets. So all that to say, infrastructure is critical. We need to continue managing our assets as a community. And if you don't, I don't think it's going to be the kind of place people want to come to. I mean, maybe you're lucky enough to be that beautiful gem or Gulf Island or wherever it may be, where it's just inherently where people want to be. But I do think managing your assets is absolutely essential. So some of the tools here, DCC's development cost charges. Of course, council gets to understand development cost charges, development cost charge bylaws. That's the tool. It's a tool that has to be approved by the minister. And there are a few instances where DCCs can be reduced or waived, and this is laid out in statute. So A, B, C, D, as you can see on the screen, not-for-profit rental housing, for-profit affordable rental housing, subdivision of small lots, development that is designed to result in a low environmental impact. So those are the statutory abilities that DCCs can be reduced or waived. And also to remember that when a council by a bylaw does reduce or waive a DCC fee that is payable, it does need to be backfilled actually by public dollars, that those fees then need to be put into the program. So I spoke with the ministry a week or two ago, and that they explained 100% that when these reductions are given, it's tough because versus other fee reductions like building permits, that's just deferred revenue. But when it comes to DCC reductions, it is intended actually that those fees need to be sort of backfilled, so to speak. Now, looking at DCCs a little bit more using the same philosophy of looking at our provincial comparatives, Pitt Meadows, Cranbrook in the middle. Again, interestingly enough, Cranbrook is in the middle. And you look at DCCs, there's such a range throughout British Columbia. You think of the large centers, stereotypically those are the big ones. There's lots of different projects that go into building out a DCC bylaw. The small communities, some rural communities, rural electoral areas don't have DCC bylaws at all. But they are important tools to try to have that new development pay for the infrastructure that those new folks living in that new neighborhood in the community. Of course, the core functions are parks, drainage, sewer, water. It's sort of that nuts and bolts infrastructure, but it is the way that the industry, so to speak, pays for its impact on the existing infrastructure. So you'll see Cranbrook's low density residential DCC about 11,000, and the multi-family or the high density is about 6,500. So right in the middle. I honestly don't think it's a fair comparison to compare, White Rock to Cranbrook, just very different setting. But this was the methodology, and we thought it's always good to sort of know where we sit, right? Maybe more fair to compare is our regional comparisons, right? But then we've got some small communities, and you'll see Kimberley, Sparwood, they don't have DCCs. Canal Flats, very, very low, $198. Elkford, $4,200 on the low density and $2,300. You'll see that multifamily is normally lower because, of course, a condominium is having a lesser impact on the infrastructure that new home is going to be placing. Cranbrook and Invermere is the highest within the region, so very fairly situated in terms of the low density and the high density DCCs. Another tool is density bonusing. Now, density bonusing is an interesting one in different markets. In downtown Vancouver, where people want density, they want that extra height or whatnot, then it's a really great tool where you can density bonus additional density in exchange for public amenities. Now, Cranbrook does have a density bonusing program in the zoning bylaw already. I don't believe it's been used lots. Again, these are the tools. It does have a definition of density bonus, and the tool that's currently in place speaks to additional dwelling units for additional common amenity areas, and also additional dwelling units for concealed off-street parking. So it's a tool that's currently in the toolkit. Of course, it has been in place for some time, and these tools may be adjusted or not, depending on the intended outcomes. Now, tax exemptions. I was looking at the agenda because I enjoy looking at that stuff. I understand that the permissive tax exemption may be on the agenda tonight, and this is more your faith-based organizations, and so that's permissive tax. Now, revitalization tax exemption is when municipal councils are looking to have a tax exemption to encourage development in targeted areas or certain properties. They can look to hit on certain things like economic development, social, environmental revitalization. These revite tax exemptions apply only to the municipal property taxes. That's an important one. When you look at your tax bill, municipal is but one. Of course, there's regional district and hospitals and all the other lists in the tax bill, but it does apply to your municipal component. Now, another piece to the tax exemption side is Cranbrook actually did have a downtown revitalization tax exemption. It was in place for some time. I'm told from staff it was not particularly used as far as the tool. It had certain areas within the downtown, A, B, C, D, E, and it had ratcheting amounts of 100%, 75, 50. So these tools have been used to varying success, but we wanted to flag that these tax exemptions are a tool in the toolkit that certainly can be used or adjusted as council wishes. Grants and subsidies. Now, you need to be careful with grants and subsidies to not assist business. The charter says thou shalt not assist business, but you can certainly have grants and subsidies for different things, energy efficiency or affordable housing, and lots of communities do. Now, parking reductions, it's again, the largest cities tend to have parking reductions as an incentive, or you can pay cash in lieu for parking. Very contextual to every community. It's quite different. There is a trend to eliminate parking minimums, just as we try to move towards transit. And I know not every community is transit realities is where we want it to be. And these are fascinating conversations, but just to say parking reductions could be a tool. Sometimes, when you look at the cost to deliver parking, it's not cheap. I've heard stats for in a concrete building or concrete with wood on top, $30,000 to $50,000 per parking stall. So if you don't have to build as much parking stalls, that could be an incentive to, again, maybe get that project across the viability dial, so to speak. I mentioned cash in lieu, sustainability, all sorts of good stuff. Non-market fee waivers. So this could be, building permit reductions. I've seen this used with fair success on projects. And again, that's deferred revenue compared to the development cost charges, which actually has to be backfilled. It can be, used to leverage additional funding. Sometimes your provincial or federal programs will want the community to have skin in the game, so to speak. And, your fee waivers, oftentimes building permit fees, could be a fantastic tool because they do amount to a fairly substantial dollar value. I mentioned Pemberton and Squamish. They waive building permit fees for eligible, affordable, and supportive housing projects. Now, building permit timelines, another big one, just because we dived into building permits a bit. This is a few years old, but fascinating figures here looking at the average BP timelines for processing. So you'll look, again, Cranbrook, I think, is the lowest timeline differentiated between residential and commercial, 3 weeks for a residential and 5 weeks for commercial, which is comparatively incredible. You look at the pace of processing in other centers, Courtenay, Powell River, Penticton, Prince George, a lot more. So again, these are factors. I don't think a quick building permit timeline is going to bring a non-viable project viable, but it certainly is a part of the suite or the buffet of incentives or fantastic ways you welcome investors into your community. The fees for building permits, again, this is also a few years old, but on the single family side, you'll see Cranbrook compared to Prince George, Vernon, and Kelowna is the lowest on the single family side. I think on the commercial, it was 3 of 4 at the time. So this was looking at a hypothetical $600,000 commercial build. And again, building permit fees it's quite complex the way they kind of lay them out, but this was a study that was done. So I think quite reasonably placed on the building permit fee side of things. And provision of land, oftentimes communities will put their land into the mix and try to offer that to a project that they see value in. Of course, not a market project because you can't assist business, but you do need to, try to ensure who you're partnering with, making sure that it's a healthy relationship. And you can also see that those partnerships, I mean, when working with the private sector, there's risk. You can sometimes try to mitigate risk or transfer the risk around. And inclusionary zoning is a tool that has certainly been used. That's where you have zoning and you have a certain entitlement for a number of homes or density, but you have to provide a number of affordable, attainable homes as a part of that zoning entitlement. Economic development and promotions. I think the work that Cranbrook is doing is well above their weight class. I think Choose Cranbrook is the website. Oh, no, I've got it right here. Yeah, choosecranbrook.ca is a brilliant website. It's that central portal where people can come and learn about your community and just get connected with what needs to happen to work through the development process. So I mentioned ECDev, so you work with your local businesses, residents, Chamber of Commerce, positioning the community as a desirable place to live. I think it's obvious that Cranbrook is highly desirable, and having the portal to highlight that is a fantastic tool in trying to bring the right people to the community to invest in Cranbrook. So the message is highly curated, that sort of pathfinder or lighthouse is there. And I would say that this message hits above its size and is comparable to much larger centers. Now, another place to go or industry organization is the Urban Development Institute. They are active in some of the largest centers, definitely Vancouver, I know in the Okanagan and Calgary. So the UDI is an industry group of development folks, and you can lean on them. It's their goal to, of course, try to connect people working within this space with opportunities. So I would definitely encourage working with UDI and trying to bring people to the community, because you want to attract the good developers. And of course, there's some that have great reputation and others that don't necessarily, but you want to work with the professional outfits that are affiliated with industry standard and are doing the good work. So just rounding things up, I'm going to be getting close to finishing my presentation here. Pre-zoning, we've spoken a little bit about that. We to some extent, fourplexes, and in some instances, depending on transit proximity, up to sixplexes. But if you want to go, higher for, maybe a wood frame building in your downtown core, there would still need to most likely be some zoning work that needs to happen. But the goal here is to try to pre-zone land so that approval risk is taken out of the conversation. But again, just to say that there's always two sides of the story there, where sometimes there's landowners that are selling the land, and you give a big pre-zoning and there's a perceived value lift, and then who gets the lift it's an interesting question. So every circumstance is different, but I do flag that pre-zoning is an important tool to try to get some housing readiness going, because of course approvals do sometimes take time, and this is a tool. Public-private partnerships, we've spoken a little bit about working with the private sector. They have expertise in design and certainly efficiency in delivering some of these projects. One interesting thing is, Your Worship, I used to actually work in West Kelowna, and that reputational piece was something that really intrigued me, and I do quite a bit of work in this space. It was just having a survey asking for development feedback. And we'll know the general assumption, government, hard to deal with. We all roll our eyes. I say it too, federal government, provincial government, whatever it may be, right? But I do question that, and I want to dive into that a little bit, because I do think it's not always black and white. And what I did was have this survey, which was asking critical questions, where it's not, were you happy? Because sometimes you come in and you want a building permit, and yes, you need it to be engineered because, well, we want everyone to be safe, and it's going to be a cost, and we understand. But there were questions that we asked, and they were staff pleasant, professional, and happy to assist? I think that's a very expectable metric. Did staff respond in a timely manner? Were they able to answer my questions? Did they provide clear information about any applicable process? Which is very different to, did you get what you want? You apply for a discretionary rezoning, council says, no, that's not the right spot. Well, I don't think anyone can be judged on the quality of that service. So, you look at the metrics that we hit with 91, 96%, and it was actually astounding to see, where there's a lot of people that come into City Hall and mom and pop applying for a building permit, never done it before. And, people get help through the process all the time. It's the discretionary piece where, people don't get what they want. And there's, of course, lots of complaints. But I like to scratch below the surface and get into the meat of it a little bit more. And in this instance, I was very pleasantly surprised. So I strongly suggest that happening. Capacity box, of course, trying to right-size your staff team. I think, Cranbrook certainly has a high quality professional team of staff throughout the organization, but just ensuring that you got the right capacity to try to get the work that needs to be done. And I never recommend staffing for the top, nor for the bottom. Try to hit that midpoint because there's ups and downs, right, through the process. But that feedback piece is something that I'm quite passionate about. Actually, through our company, there's a training arm called Context Academy. We train local government customer service. There's all sorts of modules behind it, but again, fascinating stuff that I think is happening in most local governments that I work in. Of course, no organization has everything always worked out, but I think trying to hit on the trust and integrity piece and that reliable service and asking the right questions that you're measuring factors that I think an administration and organization should be measured on. Was the response timely? Was the response knowledgeable? And so on. Talking about other best practices from other communities, the City of Vancouver has a housing incentive program. The budgets, of course, in Vancouver, it's almost laughable because they're so big and it doesn't really equate to most normal-sized communities when they're our biggest community in the province. But they were hitting on $32 million in grants. So again, a tool that can be scaled in Cranbrook, of course, and that supported social housing, co-op housing, and whatnot in Vancouver. Kelowna does a number of developer incentives where they've selected programs to encourage rental housing development. They also do have development cost charge credits for affordable rental projects. So again, all tools in the toolkit. Next step in this project is going to be a framework, which just kind of is going to put this into a little bit more of a written template. We wanted to introduce this sort of framework to council in person and highlight some of the pros and cons of each different tool. So looking at some other communities, Canal Flats, just close by, a couple of years ago in 2021, waived taxes for new businesses anywhere in the village, right? And again, small community, but it makes a statement. I know Langford had a very similar initiative a number of years ago where they said no business license to set up in Langford. And again, sometimes it's the soundbite. Sometimes it helps draw the attention of people that wanting to invest in your community. But another one is I was in Penticton in July on a development tour, which was really interesting, done with UDI, the Urban Development Institute, going to tour a number of new rental buildings, new condo projects, an industrial project. So just to try to put a number of people that are influential on a bus, with a guide from the city, we toured around Penticton, and it was pretty cool. And the whole goal, I think they're doing really well in terms of their development kind of readiness, I suppose, because Penticton's growing quite rapidly. But things like this are all tools to try to highlight the great work that's happening in a community and having conversations with people. So in terms of next steps here, like I said, this is going to be put together in a brief framework. And phase 2 of this project is to move forward with drafting of the toolkit content itself, internal review, of course, stakeholder engagement with various business interests and stakeholders throughout the community, then to finalize the toolkit, and then, of course, present it to council. So, Your Worship and Council, that is my presentation. So 41 minutes, I was given 45, so I've got a few minutes to spare, and there was 15, as council wishes, time for questions. So thank you very much for the time and attention. I do appreciate it. And I'm here for any questions if you wish.
Thank you very much, Mark. An excellent presentation. I think what we'll do is everybody's going to have a comment or a question for you for sure. We'll start with Councillor Graham and work around this way.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I noticed and wanted to highlight was when we were looking at DCCs and communities that have them or don't have them. For us, our biggest competitor is Kimberley, and they don't have them. And also, when I look back over like the last 15 years of collecting DCCs, we've only brought in just over $4 million. So I think DCCs are something that we could really target and have a look at because, you know, development pays for development, but when there's no development, those accounts aren't getting full. And there's very little money in them to begin with. So I think that's something that, you know, we need to look at. And the other thing I wanted to just mention is the number of doors that I know you averaged it out over the 5 years, but I think if you took Broad Street out of there, Cranbrook would be in a lot different place in that list. Just to factor that in as well, you know, where, you know, that was 300 units that came in all at once. So I think we'd be sitting in a little different area there if it wasn't for that.
Thank you, Councillor Papa.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. A good presentation. Looking forward to the next phase that you work with staff on. So, I mean, what we learned again at UBCM, which is previous years, you know, Cranbrook is competing not just with the Kimberleys, but we're competing across Western Canada. The developers are well established in Lower Mainland. I mean, heck, talking to the mayor of Burnaby, he's beating the developers off with a stick, you know, and they want to provide all these amenities as well. And he's still saying, you know, we're good, right? We're the opposite of that, right? Pre-COVID, we were on a roll. We started to get Broad Street and a few other things on the go. COVID hit. We now have, well, as planning will tell you, a dozen plus upzone, medium and high density on our Victoria corridor and our downtown, a few other surrounding areas for medium high density. COVID and all the circumstances, now everyone's sitting and waiting. The developers are expecting we come up with incentives. It's just the nature of the business, and if we're without the incentives, whatever those are going to be, we have to get those in place. And my ask would be that we look at, following our OCP, where do we want our core complete neighborhood development to occur? OCP saying along the Victoria corridor, our downtown, and these particular areas, not necessarily sprawling out into green spaces, but in our infill spaces within our corridors of Victoria and our downtown core. So I'm really thinking we can hopefully incentivize that type of targeted developments, more so than we do out on the green spaces where you have to run infrastructure and everything out to. Thanks for the list of the suite of incentives. I'm familiar with most of them. Yeah, let's see how we can get this moving in alignment with our OCP where we want the development to occur. Thank you.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Mayor Price. Thank you very much for the presentation. This might be more of a question for staff. So for myself and in our communications with the residents, just to be clear on what our targets are. So in the presentation, the chart referred to 690 for a total need, but then in the text, we had more like 1,200. So if we go to the housing needs report, the 690 number is future housing demand. But I think probably what we want to be communicating is the combined unmet need and future demand. So that number is a different, more colorful chart with 1,415. So maybe, and partly this is just to wrap my own head around it, but I just want us to be on the same page and really clear with the community when we're communicating this stuff as well.
So through the mayor to council, yeah, I mean, the numbers that we use are the ones that come out of our report. I think what Mark was using was just a synopsis. And we've been going with the most recent numbers that we put out in like September. And we will be putting out new numbers before the end of next year using the new provincial tool. And I can tell you just anecdotally, we've done using the calculation and it's double what we require now. So using the province's quick tool, and the requirement to take that housing needs and then update our OCPs by the end of next year as an interim housing report, we're projecting out close to 4,000 units. So, but those the numbers that we are using are the ones that come out of reports. The one that Mark used was just for information, but those are the formal documents that we are using. That's what all the media has been using. And they're going to change before the end of next year.
Yeah, thank
even
you.
More so.
Yeah, it's good to know, just so we have a sense of what our challenge is. So I totally appreciate that. And then, you know, I think it's excellent to look at the tools that are potentially available to us that maybe we haven't used in the past or we can use in a new way. Just want to make sure as part of the conversation that we include the work of the mayor's task force on housing and looking at other new tools we haven't used before, whether it be looking at cooperative housing or nonprofit or a housing corp and housing authority. I have a steep learning curve on all of those things. So just want to make sure that that's included as part of the conversation. I think as someone previously out in the community, it felt a little bit like we were really depending on for-profit developers. And of course, they need to make money for their company and their shareholders. And so the economics may not make sense for them to be building affordable housing or some of those other options that we know are missing. So just want to make sure that we have some other tools in our toolbox to fill in and where we can hopefully drive our own ship a little more than we've been able to in the past.
Thank you. Councilor Bissett.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. So I'm sure you're aware that one of our issues is that we've approved a number of multifamily housing developments, but they haven't gone ahead. And so we clearly have a gap here, and we've been told it's market conditions and that, okay, but we still have this housing shortage. So we need to address that, because I feel like we've done our bit as far as what we're allowed to so far, but there's something else we need to be doing. And so can you solve our problem right now?
I'm an optimist by nature, and I do think in time things do come together if you do the groundwork. And that's my advice. Is I know it's not as immediately gratifying as a promise of a silver bullet. I do think when the stars align in terms of global economy, interest rates, commodities, price of labor, like there's a lot of inputs here, and a community that is desirable and has got their house in order, so to speak, in terms of great incentives that will hopefully nudge a slightly right on the line project. That's when the magic happens. There is a time. I've seen it in Kelowna, downtown Kelowna, which is now getting 40 plus stories happening. Some people love it, some people don't, but it's definitely taken off, so to speak. And there was a time 20 years ago, I've been in the community 20 years, where people were really wanting that core, that downtown, even just a 4-story condo in the downtown, right? Where you can have people, vibrancy, all the good stuff, cafes, brew pubs. There's things you can control and things you can't control. And of course, the global economy is the biggest driver. So we've got that small little wedge. Let's do that absolutely perfectly. And then we wait until the big picture environment lines up. And then I think that's when the magic happens. So I wish I had a silver bullet in a more immediate response, but that's my take on it.
Thank you. And then another issue is we have, through the downtown area, there's a number of empty lots. And I believe that people aren't paying large amounts for taxes on them, but they're sitting there. And there doesn't seem to be an incentive to develop them, because we'd really like to see those fourplexes moving in there. And there's quite a few of them around. I mean, just anecdotally and walking around, there's quite a few gaps. And it would help us immensely, because then we already have the infrastructure going right by, and then we'd get more in taxes, and then we'd have housing, and then we'd have walkable community, bikeable, all that kind of stuff. But we need to get those lots developed.
I agree.
Councilor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would agree with Councilor Bissett there. If not develop the lots, then at least have some incentive to sell the lots. Because if the people are just sitting on it as a landhold, then there's really nothing to incentivize them to get rid of it. Because I think there would be other developers that might want to do something on those properties. Going back to Councilor Graham's point about the DCCs, and your data shows that we are sitting, we're sitting in the middle as far as similar sized communities. But we're almost on the comparable of communities that are doing twice as much development as we are. And then we're significantly higher than communities that are doing, I guess, a little bit less development than us. Just wondering if you have opinion as far as like where we sit on DCCs if you feel like we are at a comfortable level for the amount of development that we're getting. And then I guess a question for staff too. Since council raised our DCCs, I don't know if that was 2 years ago, have you noticed it being a hurdle with developers? Are we losing any developments because of our higher DCCs? Or are we kind of, seen as just, the cost of doing business in Cranbrook and people are just going along with it? So sir, I'll start with your opinion.
Yeah, I'll begin with my thoughts, and please staff if you have additional ideas to add. I mean, the thing with DCCs is it's about infrastructure, new infrastructure to service development, right? So pipes, roads, sidewalks, whatever it may be. If you lower DCCs, you do less infrastructure, or you shift the burden onto the general population, right? And if you do less infrastructure in these new areas where growth is happening, don't expect much new growth, right? Because new growth needs infrastructure to support it. So again, it's all about council's intention here. If you do, keep DCCs at a low point, and also, of course, council's prerogative, then that burden typically ends up being shifted onto the general taxpayer. And that's a philosophical taxation question. And of course, council's to make. Most communities tend to have, there's an assist factor in development cost charges, and you can dial it, to 1 is kind of the minimum if councils want development to fund itself. You can increase the assist factor in your DCCs, or you can shift the burden onto the general taxpayer. Most councils choose not to do that because new development, philosophically, most people tend to believe that it should pay for itself. Again, it's a philosophical and political question that council needs to decide. I would always encourage, if a community wants to grow and embrace new growth, outside investment, don't cut back on your infrastructure. This is the meat and potatoes these are the building blocks that everything gets built on. However, council wishes to, have the financial arrangements, that's their prerogative, but infrastructure is key for attracting future investment.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Peabody through the mayor, that is a great question. So people do express concern about fees and costs of anything. As was shown on the presentation, our DCC costs are a very, very small part of the pie as far as what makes a project viable. We've had, I think, more of the concerns that we do think could be addressed through consideration of policy would be for maybe the type of housing that we're not seeing the regular market provide. So that would be any of the nonprofit housing right now would require that, and also through secondary suites. So if we are looking at infill properties, if we are looking at downtown areas, then we do have the ability to look at site specific or region area specific DCCs, or also supporting some of that non-market housing. I'll definitely reiterate what Mark said, and it does tie into what Councillor Graham said, is historically we haven't been collecting a lot of DCCs, so those DCC funds are low. Right now, if we don't have enough DCC funds in that pool of funding, then our assist factor from the city automatically needs to increase, which would mean we need to collect that from the rest of the tax base, or we would have to be funneling projects from the capital program towards development related projects, which would mean we don't fix and replace all the aging infrastructure and all the side streets that are a deficit, and we would have to shift the tax-based infrastructure funding to support development and leave a lot of the stuff aside. So it's a very difficult and tough conversation, but it's a push and pull. As soon as the funding targets that we brought forward to council, especially with the inflation that's happened over the last several years, we are still significantly below what our sustainable funding levels need to be to maintain the existing level of service that we see out there today. So if everybody thinks that the roads and the water and the sewer are in great condition, then we could probably kind of get by with where we are, but we know that's not the case. And the operational costs of repairs and maintenance on the back end is difficult. So I think that's something that we want to bring more clarity to when we do talk about these DCC conversations, is that right now, the funding levels that are in the current bylaw passed in 2022 are based on some of those pre-inflation prices. So if we wanted to collect enough DCCs to meet the required funding for some of these projects that will need to happen for development, or else we say no to development, we need to increase DCCs or significantly increase taxes and fees for infrastructure. Some of these projects are related to highway upgrades. The Ministry of Transportation will say no to that rezoning or no to that development unless these highway upgrades happen. If there's not enough DCC funding for those highway upgrades, again, we pull all of our capital funding and we see if we have enough to get the intersection upgrade done for development, and we're not able to take care of repaving the streets, fixing the sidewalks, getting stuff done elsewhere in the community where the existing tax base has been, paying for decades. So it is an immense challenge, and it really is a difficult conversation that we do need to have, and that's really compounded with an infrastructure deficit and everything costing a lot more right now. So we need to be really targeted with that approach, and just do understand that if there's a push or pull on one side, that there has to be an equal offsetting somewhere else.
Thank you, Mike.
So one more question,
Sure.
if I may. So I did like the data you showed from the survey, and that was from the city of Kelowna, developers there.
Which one, sorry? I didn't-
You had like a, sorry, just like a survey that was
Oh, that was
satisfaction
West
survey.
Kelowna. Yes,
West Kelowna.
yes.
Now, is there plans to do something similar like that in Cranbrook, or is this just a suggestion as far as like what we should do?
Councillor Peabody, through the mayor, we've had a lot of discussions about how we have tried on many platforms to engage with the building and development community. We've worked alongside the mayor very closely. And this is something, when we're talking about low-hanging fruit, this is something that we would love to be able to undertake right away. We've tried it through different ways. We've tried working with the development community. We've tried working through the Chamber of Commerce to find ways where we can get tangible information from the clients that we work with to make recommendations for improvements, either in our processes, policies, communications. We need that type of feedback in order to make informed decisions. And we really have been trying to be open to that, be open to feedback. We're open to criticism. We want it to be done in a constructive manner so we can understand some facts and we can continue to do these things. So that is one of those opportunities for fairly immediate implementation, because we've been spending a lot of resources on this and not getting as much of the feedback that we'd like to see, so we can actually make some recommendations and improvements. So this is one of those items where we've got a few different ways that we're going to be trying to do that. But we do see the opportunity operationally for us to look at implementing something like that very soon.
Perfect. Yeah. I don't know about anyone else on the table here, but I've never had a developer call to offer a compliment. It always seems to be some sort of criticism. So it'd be nice to have a survey to see more of a realistic picture as far as the level of service that we are providing.
Yeah,
Okay,
no kidding.
great. Thank you.
Councillor Stetsky.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the report. I think it's a good summary. And I look forward to the follow-up report. You've done this in a number of communities, I take it?
Yeah.
So interested in sort of a snapshot in time. If you were sitting there right now with several $1 million in your pocket, would you invest it in Cranbrook? Why, or what do you think are some of the barriers that hopefully will be addressed that would encourage you to invest it in Cranbrook?
Business people are opportunists by nature. They go where the opportunity is. So it's about market demand. If the market demand's not there, I think the risk proposition is high as an investor looking to develop a condo for sale. If the risk is decreased and the market is there, business entity will go there, right? So I'm boiling it down really simply as I'm thinking through how to answer your question. So I think if a city can try to de-risk the proposition by using maybe a number of these tools, and this won't move the dial completely, but it has the potential to do a minor shift, then I think that will increase the likelihood that those cash flush investors that we're talking about will want to choose Cranbrook and come invest here. I think a very compelling benefit of Cranbrook is, of course, lifestyle, scenery. It's a stunning place to be. I needn't tell council and staff. I think it's about lining things up when the world economy or the national economy is ready to really hum on real estate investment. And we know the need is there. So the housing needs assessment, these are tools developers look at. I literally had a developer client ask me to do a deep dive on, viability and need within a community. First place we went was looking at these studies, looking at these policies. So it's all supported by council. Council's backing up the positions that they've taken in these policy statements. So that decreases the risk. Now, if you're talking about other incentives, that decreases the risk too. So when the market comes back and people are buying, the need for housing exists, which I don't think has gone away. I think that will absolutely make a great investment proposition. So I think absolutely Cranbrook has all the fundamentals. We know that the demand for housing is there. It's about trying to right-size the project. I don't think having, a high-end Ritz-Carlton project, it needs to be a project that the biggest band within our need profile is looking to get into. I think it will be viable.
So how does a community get a reputation that developers look at and say, I think that's a great place to go, in your experience?
I've worked in a number of places where communities have had the bad rap of hard to deal with. I mean, we've all heard it, right, in different communities. I encourage critical thinking when you hear that, because oftentimes it's a disgruntled entity that maybe didn't hear what they wanted to hear. Or what do you mean I need a geotech report? Oh boy, I thought it was going to be easy. Everyone told me to come on down and it's going to be great. Development has requirements. I mean, you need to do stuff that costs money to develop. That's why I like to scratch below the surface. I like to get, a holistic number. Like we didn't have thousands of responses, but we had hundreds of responses, which is more than that one cranky, person that comes and has everyone's ear, and that's all you hear as elected officials. I try to get a bigger block of feedback. And in my experience, I've done it twice in 2 communities. It's been very positive. So, I mean, unquestionably, cities deliver great work. I mean, this is hard stuff to renew your assets, build your parks, process your rezoning. It's like, this is not easy stuff. In my opinion, cities do great work across the board, some better than others, of course. So I try to capture the positive sentiment and refine your processes in a meaningful way as best as you can, and all the process. That's why I put that development process guide on the screen, because it exists. It's a real tool that people can use. So I think there's a lot of great work happening here. I think sometimes things like awards help, where there's great work that's happening. Submit for an award, get acknowledged, an external pat on the back. I think that kind of stuff helps build the narrative. And when you get great feedback, report back on it quarterly at your council meetings. Maybe the numbers start low, maybe you build from there and get a lot more positive momentum. But it's tools for staff to try to understand the pinch points. Every little enter, send on a survey, please give us your name, give us your number. Do you want us to call? And I know I would call, and I'm sure staff would do the same. Now there's an opportunity to try to bring that customer around and try to understand the problem and try to have that conversation. Maybe something can be done. Not always, but maybe sometimes. Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments just based on the conversations I'm hearing here, and then one question at the end. But Mark, I totally agree with you that, looking at developers, they're opportunists. They see an opportunity. That's what we saw the Ennis project. These guys are watching what's going on, and any new announcements, they're on top of it. So I totally agree with you. And to Councillor Stetsky's question on reputation, you know what? Incentives. If we've got enough incentives and we got process efficiency and we get the word out, I think that develops a reputation. A couple of quick things. Councillor Blissette's comment, on projects that we've approved. We're going to talk about those in a little bit here. It is so frustrating. And, I've talked with engineering and planning and we're bound by the charter or whatever. There's nothing we can do to go out and force them, once we've done a zoning amendment, there's nothing we can do to force them to have a project on time. But I think that there is. I think the extent of incentives are really relative to how bad we want the development or certain types of development. So, Councilor Graham was talking about DCCs. I would never want to see us eliminate DCCs. I mean, Sir, it's only $4 million, but what would we do without that $4 million when 300 and some thousand dollars is 1% tax? You know, what we're gonna do on a road program, you know, it's gonna kill us. But I can see on certain projects, reducing to a 50% or something. And I can see putting a number of these incentives together. DCC incentive, a tax incentive for 3 to 5 years. We're really not out anything. And if that's the projects we want, and in specific areas, and we can tie those incentives to a timeline, a development timeline. Basically, it's a project schedule. Here's your start time, here's your completion time. I don't know if we can do that, and you qualify for this. If you're late, it's no different than penalties when you have a contract. You're gonna lose this, you're gonna lose this, you're gonna lose this. And I'm saying, let's go all out on incentives. We've got nothing to lose, but they've got something to lose if they don't take advantage of it within a certain term, within a certain time period. That's, I think, one way that we can, you know, offset this nonsense that's been going on around here for, I don't know how many years, because it certainly is frustrating. And I guess the last thing on what we're doing here, this is really good stuff. I'm really happy to see how this is coming together. I'm just wondering about the timeline to have this framework completed. What I would like to do is, we've kind of promised the developers and contractors after our last meeting last year that we hope to have something going forward with them again, follow up what we're doing, this and that. It would sure be nice to have something like this for their off season. So we could go to them in the off season and say, here's what we've done. Here's our new bylaws. Here's the incentives. Here's the conditions, and roll it out well before the next building season. I think that's going to make a difference. And then again, then Darren's got, you know, the opportunity to take this and run with this out of town, you know, out of province, whatever. And I really believe that the incentives are there. It's going to happen because land prices in Cranbrook, I mean, let's be honest, there is reasonable there is in Western Canada, really. So, yeah. So just your thoughts on timeline to see something completed at the end of the day.
Mayor Price, we've talked about that a lot, and that's why we really accelerated the process to get this in front of council. Most of the work that we're speaking to does require, you know, policy adoption by council, which is why staff didn't go and make a bunch of assumptions that this is what council would want to see ahead of time. So this was a bit of a conversation just to make sure that we're all on the same page with understanding the factors that would go into these incentives. You know, when we're talking about DCCs versus, you know, a revitalization tax exemption, the tax exemption can provide the exact same monetary benefit for the same development. It's a deferred revenue rather than a reduction in infrastructure investment. Those are the balances, and that's what we want to be able to look at. Because, you know, we can agree that one of those is maybe potentially better than the other, but then we also need to quantify, you know, what magnitude that is and what the timeframes are. We met earlier this afternoon and we spoke about, you know, can we incentivize the timeline of the incentives by council, you know, adopting it to be only valid for 2 or 3 years, which would be a conventional life cycle of a project. To say get something in the door for people that are maybe, you know, speculating on something going on. And then we're seeing, you know, if interest rates goes down, then maybe those things align to say, we want to see things happen right away. So that's the ability for us to have a bit of a carrot and stick approach, but you're not really disincentivizing it. You're saying, let's get things moving fairly quickly. So, you know, what we wanted to do here is get some feedback from council. So we can start looking at not just what these would be, but what the magnitude would be, what some of the financial implications would be, bring it back to council as soon as we can this fall to get really some endorsement on how we would go forward. We've been doing a little bit of work in the background, looking at example policies and example bylaws, because we do need to create that, and it does take staff time and resources, which we are overly encumbered with, you know, projects that we have in the Q2. So that is difficult, but we do see this as something that we would like to find the resources to do as well. And that's why, we've engaged some external support with Mark to try to move this along a little bit quicker. So the hope would be, even if we can't have, because it would have to be a policy and there's legal implications there, and it would have to be a policy adopted by council and a bylaw, those processes just take some time. But ideally, if we come to a council meeting within the next month or so with a prescription on what it is, we can make some announcements on what we're going to be developing, and then we can still have to go through the process of the work it takes to develop and adopt it. But we would like to see that happening, and then we can look at how it can be applied to projects going forward, so we can have some certainty, because we do see some great potential in the coming 2 years of building seasons, looking at the market, looking at the interest rates, and looking at what we can do here.
Thanks, Mike. Follow-up questions, maybe we'll go from Councillor Statsky and move this way this time.
Yeah, just quickly, I brought up a couple of questions, and this might not be within your scope, but one of the things that certainly you've thought about, and I think we've talked about briefly, is are you aware of any communities that upzoned a piece of property with a time limit? In other words, they said, we were upzoning this piece, you have 3 years to develop it, or we're downzoning it again.
I'm not aware of anyone that's done it quite like that. I know that the phased development agreement tool is a tool in the last, 8 to 10 years that the province has allowed, that gives communities a fair bit of flexibility in granting zonings in exchange for something. So it hasn't quite germinated as to what my response would be, but I think that it might involve a phased development agreement.
And secondly, a long time ago, I think it was Port Alberni brought in a bylaw that allowed the city to increase property taxes every year on abandoned buildings that just sat there. And the owner was advised that, you either do something with this building or your taxes are going to increase by so much next year and the year after and the year after, to try and get him to do something with the derelict buildings. I think they ended up in court, but I'm not sure. Have you come across that at all as an incentive to make your communities better more quickly?
Mm-hmm. Not offhand, but we can definitely research and bring it back to council.
Councillor Peabody, any follow-up?
Yeah, just quick. Councillor Stetsky was talking about, investing here, and your comment was, really investment goes where the market demand is. And I guess it'd be more of a question for staff and probably more Darren. How are we marketing the market demand that is in Cranbrook? And are we marketing some of the success stories that have happened here too? Like, I think Broad Street is one. Was it 300 doors? And I think there was a wait list to get in there. I think that's where we really need to see our message getting out to other communities, is that market demand is in Cranbrook, and that it's a very, I guess it's a safe place to invest, I guess, into development.
Councillor Peabody, through the mayor, I think Darren's done a great job of showcasing, especially that Broad Street project, and that did involve a partnership with the city when it came to some of the off-site servicing. Rather than just having the sidewalk in front of the development and the rest of that street leading to it from schools and parks having nothing happen, we invested in a significant amount of sidewalk work and other infrastructure work. Luckily, it was a time when things didn't cost too much, but it showed a great example of when we did have good funding levels, it worked out. We've discussed off the heels of this initiative, looking at renewing some communications and marketing on exactly these types of things. The city of Cranbrook has historically been, sort of passive when it comes to this type of thing, where the market has just done what the market has, and then we go with the flow. And we're realizing now, with the challenges that we do have with housing, with infrastructure, with development, with tax base, that we do need to take a leading role in the proactive planning that council's seen over the last couple of years. And it's, like I said before, it's probably this current, 5-year window of planning initiatives that we've been doing is probably equal to all of the work that's been done in the previous 50 or 60 years. So it is really trying to build that foundation. So when the market does move and we have some of these incentives going, we need to really have it be done in a smart way where we don't look back and see, well, we should have captured costs, or we should have planned this appropriately, or we didn't just let development go wherever it wanted to go. But marketing and communications is a big part of what we want to do there. We've met as a team, but it does require some investment. It does require some, opportunities for us to develop some of those materials, but we do really see that as being something that we can do, and then the return on that investment should hopefully help pay for itself. So some of that work is going to be potentially related to the HAF application for the secondary intake that was just done. We've had some meetings with them, and we're cautiously optimistic that they believe we have a great application to bring that forward. But that is something that we're going to be doing more, is once we have some more of this development specific policy, then we can have some of those specifics marketed in addition to some of the other stuff that we've been doing more broader from a livability perspective. And the more that we have metrics, the more that we gather this data, the more we can get information from developers, we can get quotes, we can have meetings. We're looking at renewing the way that we do meet and onboard with developers to make sure that we're providing them with the broad spectrum of services that we can provide. So yes, that's in a little bit of a longer response. It's a big priority of ours going forward.
Councilor Bissett. You're good? Councilor Ray. Councilor Papa.
Yes, thank you. So one thing I did learn was that as we move forward with our housing task force that Councilor Ray spoke about, phase 2, we can, for the non-market rental and low cost affordable, if we go forward in that direction, we can utilize some of these incentives specifically for those pieces, which will again make it more affordable and greater partnerships. So that would be interesting to flesh out a little bit more how that could come in as being some of the playing tools that are available to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Graham.
Yeah, and I guess just one last thing would be around the upfront costs for development. And I wondering if there's ways that it can be a staged cost as development happens, rather than, this development's going to be 3 phases, 600 units, but that might be 10 years to build out. So can there be staged approaches to funding the upgrades that need to happen for that development versus all upfront costs? Can it be done while it's being built out? That might be something to look at.
Yeah, I think that this is very timely. Certainly, we've been waiting for something to happen. We have to take some responsibility and take control, where the city really does have some influence and control over what's, over development. And I think this is the tool. This is the key here right now. So staff, thank you so much for, you come back with a lot more than I was expecting. So I'm really impressed, Mark. Thank you very much, and looking forward to going forward with you on this. Thank you. Good stuff. Thanks, guys. Next up is admin updates. There's one admin update this afternoon from Engineering Development Services Department regarding development approvals. Mike, can the department provide an update on this?
Absolutely. Mayor and council, we felt that it would be a good timing to have a little bit of an update on a lot of these higher profile land use applications and decisions and approvals, as well as some of the subdivision developments on there. So I'm not going to go through it line by line, but it is an opportunity for council to have an understanding of where some of these things are at. I think the presentation that Mark provided really does show that council sees a big part of their role doing some of these rezoning approvals, and it looks and it feels like that's sort of the green light to get these projects going. And in some of these cases, in speaking with these landowners and development, That's often the first step in them understanding if the project is financially viable. If they don't have certainty from council that the land use and the zoning that they've applied for is going to be approved, they aren't going to be doing all of the work in the background pricing out a project, because it's very expensive to hire architects, hire professionals, look at getting financing. So even though they do provide some conceptual drawings up front going with a lot of these applications, it is still often just one step or an initial step in understanding whether or not things are going to go forward. It's not necessarily the next day they're going to come in with a development permit or a building permit. We have had discussions with some of these developers, and they've given us some of the timelines where they've said, well, it's taken us a couple years to look at getting the financing, getting the approvals, especially into the the nonprofit housing opportunities. We've talked to one provider that's had to go in for a second round of applications for funding, and they're hoping that they've been successful. But it is one of these projects that has been subject to approval for quite some time. It is also an opportunity for us to look at some of these specific developments. And when we're talking about these development incentives programs, trying to look at what they would mean within the lens of these developments, so we understand a little bit more about what's going on. When it comes to development, in Cranbrook, things are transforming. If we're looking at more high density and more of those types of projects, it's involving a different type of development community. So there is a bit of, maybe some growing challenges within that sector to understand where do our local developers and builders have a strong role to play in getting some more of this development going forward. And then how do we also work with some of those, external developers? And I think sometimes we see, conflicts in understanding what prices are for land versus what profits are for development. And historically, a lot of the development in the community has been fairly profitable. And when those profit margins get a little bit tighter, sometimes that land does sit there a little bit longer, hoping for things to happen. And that's where some of this incentive discussion does happen. So if council does have any questions, these are all projects, subdivisions, developments, and rezonings that were part of the public record. Some of the updates are in there, and we'll leave it to council for any questions.
Councilor Stetsky?
Just curious on the comment, unknown to staff. So you've got an address, but we don't know what's happening? In the far right-hand columns, there are a couple of them say, in terms of notes, unknown to staff.
Councillor Stetsky through the mayor. Those ones on the subdivision updated, we've issued the PLA, the preliminary layout approval letter. And we just don't know, it's just gone quiet from a staff perspective. They haven't come back with anything. So it's just staff, we just don't know what happened to the development, why it didn't move forward, or are they working on the conditions behind the scenes are going to come forward at some point.
So do we ever make follow-up phone calls? Just go down this list to everyone and say, so what's up? Where are you? We still want you.
Councillor Stetsky through the mayor, for some of the larger projects, for some of the apartment buildings and some of the major developments, we do have those follow-up conversations because we do want to make sure that we're being proactive. Some of these other subdivisions are very small lots, maybe looking at a small, simple subdivision that's not as prominent. So for those ones, they may be looking at just having an additional lot for their family member in the future or something along those lines. So, but we do make those follow-up conversations, especially for some of those larger developments, just to make sure there's a robust communications process. As we look at incorporating more of these developments into the new software that we will be implementing, then we will have all this stuff will be better digitized, so we will understand how long it's been since we've had the last touch point with that developer. We can automate some of those emails out just to check in with people and make sure if there's something outstanding from our part. Often there is a miscommunication from that perspective where we've provided some guidance and the ball is in their court, but maybe they missed it or didn't realize it. So we will be able to firm up and formalize that communication in a little bit of a better way going forward.
I would certainly support that. I think whether it's one lot or, one person building a home or a 300 apartment units, I'd like to know that the city still cares about me and get a phone call from you.
Councilor Popoff.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So as Mark was saying, we all have these same pressures about costs and regulatory and everything else that's preventing development, but yet around the East Kootenays, other communities are building. Kimberley is building. They're in a construction mini boom, if you will, with all the even some medium densities and some higher densities. Our mayor out in Jaffrey, they're building. Elkford, they're building, and yet Cranbrook's sitting. On your third slide here, there's you listed in the shaded areas those properties that we upzoned in our last 10 years. When you do the math, there's 412 units of medium high density, starting with, remember St. Mary's property back in 2017, right? And they're sitting. So my question is, on an annual basis, I'm hoping, Darren, no pressure, hoping you're in contact with these people and saying, what are your challenges? What's your state of readiness? We're anxious to get you going. And I'd like to hear, I think council would like to hear in a very general term, what are the challenges and what's the readiness? What's holding them back? Because we've done a lot of work on council. We've taken a lot of not in my backyard on council, and they're sitting. And I think this might be an opportunity to look at those challenges as it comes forward in the context of what Mark's going to be putting forward.
Councilor Popoff, through Mayor Price. Just one comment on that about the other developers in the region. So as a part of this process we went through, in the last couple of months, I've reached out to the developers locally here that have owned land, Broad Street, Harvest Group, Canis, same with New Dawn. These are all developers that have land holdings in both Kimberley and Cranbrook. And in talking to the developers, the answer was pretty simple. The easy land or the path of least resistance lied in Kimberley or elsewhere. There isn't any easy land left in Cranbrook, especially for high density. If you look at Broad Street, they've been looking for the last year and a half for 5 to 10 acre parcel that's investment ready. And the fact is that the easy land in our community has been developed on. So that's part of the challenge.
So my question then back, we didn't hear there was high challenges with developing these shaded areas on slide 3 when they were coming forward for rezoning. And now we hear there's challenges in development. Not now, but at some point. What are the challenges to develop the St. Mary's property down by the school? What are I know the Segarty one, there might be some challenges. The other ones I'm looking at here that we just zoned, the one on Victoria Avenue for the seniors, we heard it was good to go, and now we're hearing there's challenges with developing. So not maybe now, Mike, but because I know we're on the clock, right? But I'd like to know what those challenges are that they're facing. What are they city related and what are they just construction related? That's unique to Cranbrook, and why Kimberley doesn't have these challenges.
Councilor Popoff, through the mayor, I think the word challenges is maybe not the most accurate way to describe it, but I do understand some properties are encumbered with whether it's a former Schedule 2 use. We've all had those understandings with some of these Ministry of Environment regulations. Some of them do require servicing improvements. That's either something that the developer needs to do or the city needs to be proactively investing in infrastructure. Some of these as Darren spoke to, there are easily and readily developable properties in the city of Cranbrook. There just may be some properties that they were able to, we do know that we've talked to some of these developers, and some of the land that was made available in these other communities was done at a rate that is not being sold for the privately held properties in Cranbrook. So some of the readily developable properties in the city, their developers have gone and asked, can I buy this property? I'd like to do a development on it. And they've told us that the prices aren't what they would think would be reasonable. We do know that the city of Kimberley did have some property in their stock, and they were able to dispose of it to facilitate some of this development. These are discussions that we're going to be having with council in the, in the future as we go forward. These are also things that we are going to be analyzing ourselves, not just any potential city-owned land, but we are really going to be looking at some of these privately held properties that we do believe are readily developable, that do have servicing, that don't have other encumbrances on them, and trying to understand why. If there hasn't been an opportunity when the market has had its peaks and valleys over the last 20 or 30 years where these developments have not gone forward, we'd like to have a better understanding of what that is. We don't need to know what everybody's expectations are necessarily from a profitability or development perspective, but having a better understanding for some of those items is something that we do know. And we've done some comparisons with Kimberley. Yes, they do not have DCCs, but they do have connection fees that we do not have. So there's different nuances from those perspectives. I think comparing with some of these communities like Sparwood and Elkford, where, as the mayor has noted before, a significant amount of their tax base and tax dollars comes from large mines that have billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. We just don't necessarily have that. So those are headwinds that we have to face as well. So that's when we look at the incentives and we look at these comparisons, we've got to find a solution that works well for Cranbrook, that also looks at making sure the decisions that we make are sustainable and viable in the long term. But yes, we are contacting these property owners. Darren's been doing some of these conversations over the last little while because that is some of the information that we want to incorporate into the tangible decisions that we will make with the incentive program.
Thanks, Mike. I got a question, Mike, or I'm not sure who wants to answer it. Just it's regarding Shadow Mountain here. If you look at the properties, we look at Shadow Mountain East and 328, 59, we're waiting on Modi. And then we got Shadow Mountain East, different application for 13, waiting OCP, and there's some issues there. But certainly, and then we go over to Barnaby Road, with the 80. I'm assuming all of those are sort of on hold until we satisfied Modi. Is that Barnaby Road one that we approved last year? The 81, the 80 lot, are we waiting on Modi on that one as well?
Mayor Price, yes, that's correct. They've started some on-site works, clearing, and but yes, they're waiting on MOTI for the highway upgrade requirements. We're actively working with MOTI on that.
So we're well over 100 we're waiting on there. And then I see we got Wildstone Heights Phase 1, possible 32 Modi traffic impacts. That will not go until we've satisfied are we looking at that whole corridor, or is that just going to be up on, what road is that? Industrial Road? Or?
Yeah. Mayor Price, again, the Wildstone Heights land, that's all stuck at the rezoning OCP stage with the MOTI approval because of the 800-meter vicinity to the corridor. So until MOTI gives the approval, they can't obtain approval of the subdivision because it's not zoned to allow for the subdivision they've applied for.
So I know staff have been working, very hard the last couple of years with Modi, and I think we have a really good local relationship with them. That's certainly improved over the years. What are we anticipating on satisfying Modi on these, or it's not us that we'll see something happen there? Any timeline on that?
We should have some resolve fairly quickly on the Shadow Mountain East lands and Barnaby Road. MOTI has finally said what they want. They do want some minor upgrades right away, but that'll facilitate a number of homes. So hopefully we see next year some things come off the ground on Barnaby Road on the east side of Shadow Mountain. In regards to Wildstone Heights, that one still could be a little bit because it sounds like they want another revision or comments on the TIA again. So it looks like it's the 5th version of the traffic impact assessment.
Yeah. Thanks, Curtis. Further, guys? Well, thank you very much. Great session. I think it was a really good session, very timely. So thanks so much. Mark, anything, Dad? Nothing? Okay, well, at the end of that, this afternoon's meeting, can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Counselor Stetsky, Counselor Bissett. All in favor? Carried.